In a quiet suburban neighborhood, I found solace in my small farm, a tranquil escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. My pride and joy were my horses, each with their own unique personality, providing me companionship and endless joy. However, my peaceful existence took an unexpected turn when I encountered Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of our homeowners association. With her sharply defined opinions and zealous adherence to HOA rules, she often made her presence known, sometimes in ways that felt intrusive. Karen had a knack for rallying her fellow HOA members around her, creating a tight-knit group that seemed to thrive on exerting control over the community. While many residents appreciated her enthusiasm for maintaining property values and aesthetics, I found her overreaching tendencies problematic. It wasn't long before I noticed something troubling. Karen and her friends began to frequent my property without my consent, treating it as their own playground. They would show up uninvited, saddling up my horses as if they belonged to the community rather than to me. At first, I dismissed it as harmless fun, perhaps even an innocent misunderstanding. After all, we lived in a community where sharing was often encouraged. But as I watched them ride my horses day after day, the initial annoyance morphed into disbelief. The lack of respect for my boundaries felt like a violation, leading me to question how far Karen's sense of entitlement would stretch. What began as a simple conflict over property usage soon escalated into a confrontation of principles. I realized that I needed to take a stand, not just for myself, but for the integrity of my home and the rights that came with it. Little did I know that this decision would set off a series of events that would change our neighborhood dynamic forever. In our suburban community, the Homeowners Association, or HOA, played a crucial role in maintaining the neighborhood's order and aesthetics. Established to uphold property values and ensure that residents adhered to a set of guidelines, the HOA wielded significant influence over all aspects of life in our little enclave. While many appreciated the efforts to keep the area looking pristine, there were those who felt stifled by the regulations. At the heart of this dynamic was Karen, whose passion for the HOA bordered on obsession. She was not just a member. She held a leadership position that gave her authority and power over decisions that affected us all. With an unwavering belief in her vision of what our community should be, Karen often took it upon herself to interpret the rules as she saw fit. This interpretation sometimes benefited her agenda and, unfortunately, disregarded the rights of others. The HOA meetings were often tense affairs, with Karen leading spirited discussions about property upkeep and neighborhood behavior. While some residents admired her commitment, others grew weary of her relentless scrutiny. Many felt that she crossed a line between maintaining standards and imposing her will on others. As discussions grew heated, it became increasingly clear that not everyone shared her views on community sharing or individual property rights. This backdrop set the stage for my conflict with Karen. Her determination to enforce her version of community living clashed directly with my desire for autonomy over my own property. As I reflected on our neighborhood's dynamics, it became evident that while the HOA was designed to foster a sense of belonging, it also had the potential to breed resentment and division. In this tightly knit environment, where everyone knew each other's business, tensions were bound to rise when personal boundaries were crossed, especially when those boundaries involved something as cherished as my horses. The inciting incident unfolded on a sunny Saturday morning, a day I had planned to spend grooming my horses and enjoying the tranquility of my surroundings. As I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of coffee in hand, the peaceful vibe was shattered by laughter and chatter drifting over from the nearby paddock. Curiosity piqued. I walked toward the sound, only to be met with an unexpected sight that left me both shocked and furious. There was Karen, perched confidently atop my favorite mare, Daisy, while two of her friends, both members of the HOA, took turns riding my other horses. They seemed completely at ease, as if they owned the place. I stood frozen for a moment, grappling with disbelief. How could they think this was acceptable? My heart raced as I approached them, hoping to clarify the situation. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rush of anger bubbling beneath the surface. Karen turned to me with an overly casual smile, as if she were doing me a favor by letting her friends experience my horses. "Oh, we just thought it would be fun to take them for a ride. You don't mind, do you?" she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. The audacity of her response ignited a fire within me. This wasn't merely an innocent misunderstanding. It was a blatant disregard for my property rights. As I listened to her flippant justification, it became clear that she saw my horses as communal assets rather than cherished companions under my care. My frustration quickly transformed into resolve. I realized that this wasn't just about a momentary affront. It was about standing up for what belonged to me and preserving the boundaries that Karen so casually ignored. In that instant, everything changed. I knew I had to take action. As I stood there, grappling with disbelief and anger, I listened to Karen's justification unfold. With a casual wave of her hand, she dismissed my concerns, insisting that her actions were all in the spirit of community. "We thought it would be a great way to bond and enjoy the beautiful day," she explained, her tone light and carefree. "I mean, we're all neighbors here. Sharing is part of what makes this community special." I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and frustration as she painted her actions as harmless fun. She spoke as if my horses were mere props in a neighborhood gathering rather than living beings deserving of respect and care. Karen's interpretation of community seemed to hinge on her desire to exert control, believing that her needs outweighed mine. In her eyes, my reluctance to share my horses was an affront to the very essence of our neighborhood's camaraderie. What struck me most was her complete lack of awareness regarding boundaries. Karen's self-assured demeanor made it clear that she had no intention of asking for permission or respecting my ownership. She seemed to genuinely believe that because we lived in close proximity, everything, including my horses, was fair game for her and her friends. This mindset, while perhaps well-meaning in her eyes, felt deeply invasive and entitled. As she continued to justify her actions with platitudes about community spirit, I realized that this was not merely a misunderstanding. It was a fundamental clash of values. I valued individual property rights and autonomy, whereas Karen prioritized collective enjoyment without regard for personal boundaries. Her reasoning only solidified my resolve to take action. If I didn't stand up for my rights now, I feared I would continue to face encroachments on my property and peace of mind in the future. In the days that followed my confrontation with Karen, I found myself wrestling with a whirlwind of emotions. The initial shock and anger had settled into a steely determination. I realized that her disregard for my property rights wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of behavior that had the potential to undermine the sense of security I had in my own home. It became clear that if I didn't take a stand now, this would only continue. I spent hours weighing my options, torn between the desire to maintain peace in the community and the need to assert my boundaries. Reporting Karen felt like a drastic step, one that could escalate tensions and potentially lead to backlash from her and her friends. But as I reflected on what had happened, I knew I couldn't allow her entitlement to go unchecked. My horses weren't just animals. They were part of my family, and their well-being was non-negotiable. The decision crystallized during one particularly restless night. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork related to the HOA regulations. As I read through the rules regarding property rights and trespassing, it became apparent that Karen had crossed a line, one that was clearly outlined in our community guidelines. The more I learned, the more resolute I became. This wasn't just about my horses. It was about standing up for my rights as a homeowner. The next morning, I gathered all the necessary documentation and prepared to submit my report to the HOA board. My heart raced as I typed up my complaint, detailing the incidents and expressing my concerns about Karen's actions. Despite the anxiety swirling in my stomach, I felt empowered. Taking this step meant reclaiming control over my property and sending a message that boundaries matter, even in a community where sharing is often celebrated. It was time for me to assert myself and protect what was rightfully mine. With my decision made, the The process of reporting Karen began to take shape. Armed with the details of her trespass and the HOA's regulations, I felt a mix of determination and apprehension as I prepared to submit my complaint. The first step was to gather all the necessary documentation to support my case. I compiled photographs of my horses in their paddock, along with written accounts of the incidents that had occurred over the past few weeks. I want to paint a clear picture of what had transpired and why it mattered. Once everything was organized, I drafted a formal letter addressed to the HOA board. I aimed for a tone that was factual yet respectful, outlining not only the details of Karen's actions, but also expressing my concerns about the implications for property rights within our community. It was important to me that I didn't come across as confrontational. Rather, I wanted to appeal to their sense of responsibility in upholding our community guidelines. As I typed, I could feel the weight of my words. The significance of this moment loomed large in my mind. After finalizing the letter, I nervously made my way to the HOA office, which was located in a small building at the edge of our neighborhood. The familiar faces of board members greeted me as I entered, but instead of finding comfort in their presence, a wave of anxiety washed over me. This was real. I was about to challenge one of their own. I handed over my report and explained my situation succinctly. The board members listened attentively, though it was difficult to gauge their reactions. Some nodded in understanding, while others exchanged glances that hinted at unspoken opinions. After submitting my complaint, I left the office feeling both relieved and anxious. I had taken a significant step toward reclaiming my boundaries, but now I had to wait for their response, unsure of what consequences might arise from challenging Karen's authority within the HOA. In the days that followed my report, I found myself on edge, anxiously awaiting the HOA's response. The air was thick with tension as I tried to maintain my daily routine, but every knock at the door or rustle outside sent my heart racing. I knew that my complaint had the potential to stir up a considerable amount of drama, particularly given Karen's status within the community. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I received a notification for an upcoming HOA meeting where my complaint would be addressed. As the date approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Would they take my concerns seriously? Would Karen retaliate? On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, hoping to gather my thoughts and prepare for whatever might unfold. As members filtered in, I noticed that the atmosphere was charged with curiosity. Whispers spread through the room as residents exchanged knowing glances. Karen arrived, her usual confidence noticeably shaken, and she immediately sought out her supporters among the board members. It was evident she was ready to defend her actions. When it came time to discuss my report, I was given a chance to present my case to the board and other residents in attendance. With a steady voice, I recounted the incidents and emphasized the importance of respecting personal property rights within our community. The board listened attentively, and while some members nodded in agreement, others appeared skeptical. After my presentation, Karen took her turn to respond. She launched into an impassioned defense, portraying herself as a well-meaning neighbor who simply wanted to foster community spirit. Yet, as she spoke, I could sense a division forming in the room. Some residents sided with her view of communal sharing, while others began to see how her actions had overstepped reasonable boundaries. In that moment, it became clear that my report had ignited a larger conversation about respect and ownership within our community, a conversation that was long overdue. As tensions rose and opinions clashed, I realized I had sparked more than just a personal conflict. I had opened up a dialogue about community values that would resonate far beyond this single incident. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was a whirlwind of emotions. While I felt a sense of relief that my concerns had been addressed, I quickly realized that my decision to report Karen had consequences far beyond what I had anticipated. Almost immediately, I began to feel the weight of her backlash. Karen, once the confident leader of our community, now seemed determined to undermine my credibility. It started subtly. Casual comments made in passing at neighborhood gatherings, where she would frame me as overly sensitive and unwilling to share. I just wanted everyone to enjoy the horses, she would say with a dismissive wave. painting herself as the victim of an unfair attack. Her supporters rallied around her, and soon, whispers about me began to circulate. At first, I tried to brush off the gossip, reminding myself that standing up for my rights was important. But as time went on, I noticed it affecting my interactions with others in the community. Some neighbors who once greeted me warmly now offered only polite nods or avoided eye contact altogether. It stung to feel alienated in what had once felt like a close-knit community. The real turning point came when Karen organized a neighborhood gathering at her house under the guise of promoting unity. In reality, it felt more like a rallying cry for her supporters. Attending that gathering was a struggle. I could sense the tension in the air as people exchanged furtive glances whenever I entered the room. At one point, Karen openly mocked my complaint during a group discussion about property rights, framing it as an overreaction that threatened our community spirit. While her tactics were disheartening, they also fueled my resolve. I realized that this wasn't just about horses or personal boundaries. It was about standing firm against intimidation and ensuring that my voice, and the voices of others who may feel similarly marginalized, were heard. If anything, Karen's backlash only reinforced my belief in the importance of asserting oneself even when faced with adversity. This battle was far from over, and I was determined to see it through. After weeks of tension and uncertainty, the resolution came unexpectedly during a follow-up HOA meeting. The board had thoroughly reviewed my complaint and gathered input from both sides. As I sat in the familiar meeting room, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Would they side with Karen's view of community sharing, or would they recognize the importance of individual property rights? As the board members began their discussion, I could sense the atmosphere shifting. They acknowledged that while community spirit was vital, it could not come at the expense of personal boundaries. The board emphasized that my horses were indeed my property and that Karen's actions had crossed a line. Their decision to formally reprimand her for trespassing was a turning point. It validated my concerns and reaffirmed that my voice mattered. Hearing their ruling lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders. However, I knew the resolution wouldn't magically fix everything. Karen's anger was palpable, and I braced myself for her response. Surprisingly, instead of escalating tensions, her backlash began to wane. Some residents expressed support for my stance, acknowledging that they appreciated the clarity brought to the community's boundaries. In the weeks that followed, I took time to reflect on what this experience had taught me. It wasn't just about protecting my horses. It was about understanding the complexities of living in a community where perspectives often clash. I recognized that standing up for myself had far-reaching implications, not only for me, but also for others who might feel similarly vulnerable. While relationships with some neighbors remained strained, others reached out in solidarity, sharing their own stories of boundary violations. This experience had opened a dialogue about respect and individual rights within our community. In many ways, it had strengthened my resolve and deepened my understanding of what it means to coexist in a shared space. Ultimately, I learned that asserting oneself is essential, even when faced with opposition. It was a hard-fought battle, but one that instilled in me a newfound confidence to advocate for what is right, both for myself and for others who may feel silenced in their own communities. As I look back on the journey from conflict to resolution, I realized that this experience taught me invaluable lessons about community, boundaries, and self-advocacy. My initial confrontation with Karen felt daunting, but it ultimately served as a catalyst for growth, not just for myself, but for our entire neighborhood. I learned that standing up for one's rights is not merely an act of defiance. It's a necessary step in fostering a respectful and harmonious environment. The situation illuminated the complexities of living in a community where differing opinions and values often collide. I discovered that while the desire for connection and shared experiences is important, it should never come at the cost of personal autonomy or respect for individual property. Each homeowner has their own vision of what home means, and recognizing those differences is key to maintaining a healthy community dynamic. Moreover, I realized how vital it is to communicate openly about boundaries. Many neighbors had experienced similar frustrations, but felt hesitant to voice their concerns. By taking my stand, I inadvertently encouraged others to speak up about their own experiences. This newfound openness began to foster deeper connections among residents, helping us understand each other's perspectives better. Reflecting on the aftermath, I also recognized the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. Karen's initial backlash was challenging, but it only reinforced my determination to protect my space. I learned that sometimes standing firm against opposition can lead to unexpected allies and support. In conclusion, this experience reminded me that advocating for oneself is not just about winning a battle. It's about creating an atmosphere where everyone feels safe and respected. While the road may have been rocky, it ultimately strengthened my sense of belonging and commitment to nurturing a community where everyone has a voice. As I continue to care for my horses and enjoy my property, I carry forward these lessons, empowered to stand up for what is right and encourage others to do the same.